Hello everyone and welcome to week 3 of English 200, 201, and 202. This week we're going to be finishing up our section on poetry by learning about the form of the sonnet, one of the oldest forms in poetry. And we'll also begin learning about creative nonfiction with a lyric essay. So begin this week by reading chapter 4 in our textbook. It's on form. So the last element of poetry we're going to be touching on in this shortened class is poetic forms. Many poems poetry is often written in form, and form is a tradition of poetry that people write in conversation with. The form that we're going to be looking at today is called the sonnet. The basics of the sonnet are the poem is 14 lines long, and each line has 10 syllables per line. Each sonnet includes a part of it where there's a turn, where what's happening in what you're talking about in the poem changes in some way by the end. I like to think of sonnets as like a little room where you can, a little room that's lit by an image that you turn to the light, right? It's like a little tiny diorama that you're living in that you turn upside down towards the end. The other word for turn in Italian is volta. Now, Petrarch was the first to really popularize the sonnet, and he wrote hundreds of poems for this woman named Lara, and he never got on a date with her. So it was really just his way of writing about his love, but never doing anything about it. But his sonnets are called Petrarchian sonnets, and that's because of the rhyme scheme, the form of the sonnet. These letters that you see, A, B, B, A, C, D, E, C, D, E, they correspond to a rhyme scheme, and I'll be talking about more of that in a second. The first type of sonnet that we're going to be reading today is a Shakespearean sonnet, and that is with the rhyme scheme A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, and G, G. The final one that we're going to be talking about, and what we will be writing in this class, is the American sonnet. There's no set rhyme scheme. Typically, they are approximately the size of a sonnet, but you'll see how the American sonnet is all about rebelling against the form. It's a really great form where you can talk back to history, or you can declare love. It's just a small room that echoes. Let's start with William Shakespeare's famous sonnet, Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day? Sonnet 18. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot, the eye of the heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou out'st. Now, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou grow'st. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. Sonnet 18, as you'll see, has that rhyme scheme I was talking about. The word day at the end of line 1 rhymes with May at the end of line 3. Temperate rhymes with date, so 2 and 4. And then you have new rhymes, shines and declines, dimmed and untrimmed, fade and shade, oust and grossed, and then see the exact rhymes of the final couplet where the turn happens. This poem is about time, the idea that a love affair is a short a short lease on time, but that by writing this poem in the end, Shakespeare was able to make his love eternal, right? We're still reading it. He wrote this in the 1600s, right? It's a very long time for someone to remain alive, right? And so he's using the convention of the sonnet as a place to contain this big idea that, love is fleeting, love happens for a moment, but if you truly love someone, you can make them into something that you can, save forever, like a poem. Now, Elizabeth Bishop wrote this poem in 1979, a long time after William Shakespeare. It's also about love and time. Something you need to know is that what she's talking about is in the beveled glass. There's that, like if you look into a mirror, sometimes beveled glass has this edge around it. And if you look at your reflection in that, it's distorted in some way. And that's what she's talking about in regards to the rainbow bird. So, in the spirit level, that the idea of like when you're in that in between space. Also, I'd like you to pay attention to what she's doing with form here. So you saw Shakespeare's traditional form sonnet. This sonnet, she calls it sonnet, but it's not quite as long, right? Caught the bubble, right? 4 syllables. That's not 10. That's not 10 syllables. Also, Elizabeth Bishop lived, she grew up in Nova Scotia as a very young girl, spent a lot of time in Brazil, living abroad. She was gay, but she didn't really write about that. She in her previous poems, because she was writing during a time where it was really difficult to be out. And this is the final poem that she published in the New Yorker, and she does kind of address that. It's a rebellious sonnet in its form, and it's a rebellious sonnet in its content. So I'm going to read it to you. Caught the bubble in the spirit level, a creature divided, and the compass needle wobbling and wavering, undecided. Freed, the broken thermometer's mercury running away, and the rainbow bird from the narrow bevel of the empty mirror, flying wherever it feels like gay. Now, that last word is significant because she's reclaiming it. She's outing herself in a very public way, in a very public publication, the New Yorker. And she's using the platform of the sonnet to do so. So she's talking about this part of her that's trapped in the spirit level, that's trapped in the beveled mirror, right? As something that is able to finally escape, right? And that tiny, narrow bevel, that society's tight bind on her, right? And she's able to finally be free. The last one we're going to look at is called An American Sonnet for My Past and Future Assassin. I Lock You in an American Sonnet That Is Part Prison by Terence Hayes. Now, Terence Hayes is an African-American poet, and he writes about the complicated history that African-Americans have with our country, with America. I lock you in an American sonnet that is part prison, part panic closet, a little room in a house set aflame. I lock you in a form that is part music box, part meat grinder to separate the song of the bird from the bone. I lock your persona in a dream-inducing sleeper hold while your better selves watch from the bleachers. I make you both Jim and Crow here. As the Crow, you undergo a beautiful catharsis, trapped one night in the shadows of the Jim. As the Jim, the feel of Crow shit dropping to your floors is not unlike the stars falling from the pep rally posters on your walls. I make you a box of darkness with a bird in its heart, voltas of acoustics, instinct and metaphor. It is not enough to love you. It is not enough to want you destroyed. So this poem is talking about talking back to America and trying to use this very complicated form to talk back. You can see the wordplay that's happening here, like Jim and Crow. This sort of voice, it's really a, and you can see, I lock you in an American sonnet that is part prison. You know, that's 16 syllables. That's a lot of syllables, right? It is not following the form, it is breaking the form, because there's so much more to say than what you can fit in 10 syllables. But look at how it's still about the size of a sonnet, right? So both Elizabeth Bishop's sonnet, which is having the sonnet, the American sonnet from My Past and Future Assassin, which is extending the sonnet, are talking back to oppression in America through their sonnet forms. So for you this week, I'd like you to write a sonnet. I want you to write a sonnet that has 14 lines and 10 syllables per line, unless you can write a little note to me why you are deciding to make it longer or shorter based on the topic that you're writing about, like Elizabeth Bishop did and like Terence Hayes did. Do not use exact rhymes on the N words, okay? It's really important you don't do that on the sonnet. You are writing an American sonnet, not a Shakespearean sonnet. Instead, you're going to try to really focus on choosing the end words based on meaning. What words do you want on the end of your lines? What words do you want to emphasize? Make sure that each of your sonnets has a turn, right? A volta at the end, where you turn whatever you've brought into the room, right, of the sonnet to be examined, where you turn that upside down. What can you rebel against in your sonnet? Don't be afraid to play with how the sonnet looks on the page as well, okay? Now, our next lesson is on creative nonfiction. That's the second genre we're going to be talking about in this class. Now, creative nonfiction looks like the essays that maybe you've come across in your composition classes, right? But it's not like that at all, okay? You're supposed to have as much fun, as much playfulness, all those tools that we've learned in poetry. You're going to use those when you write creative nonfiction. Now we're going to start learning about creative nonfiction by reading a lyric essay, a section of it by Claudia Rankine. This is Claudia Rankine. She won the National Book Award for her book Citizen, which if you were in my semester-long class, you would read the whole thing. If you feel like reading it and you want to email me and talk about it, that would be great. I highly recommend it. It's an excellent book. But we're going to just deal with one section of it and do an exercise on it because this class is shorter in the summer. So this is from Citizen. A woman you do not know wants to join you for lunch. You are visiting her campus. In the cafe, you both order the Caesar salad. This overlap is not the beginning of anything, because she immediately points out that she, her father, her grandfather, and you all attended the same college. She wanted her son to go there as well, but because of affirmative action or minority something, she's not sure what they are calling it these days, and weren't they supposed to get rid of it? Her son wasn't accepted. You are not sure if you are meant to apologize for the failure of your alma mater's legacy program. Instead, you ask where he ended up. The prestigious school she mentions doesn't seem to assuage her irritation. This exchange, in effect, ends your lunch. The salads arrive. A friend argues that Americans battle between the, quote, historical self and, quote, the self-self. By this, she means you mostly interact as friends with mutual interests and, for the most part, compatible personalities. However, sometimes your historical selves, her white self and your black self, or your white self and her black self, arrive with the full force of your American positioning. Then you are standing face to face in seconds that wipe the affable smiles right from your mouths. What did you say? Instantaneously, your attachment seems fragile, tenuous, subject to any transgression of your historical self. And though your joined personal histories are supposed to save you from misunderstandings, they usually cause you to understand all too well what is meant. So what Claudia Rankine is doing in Citizen is she's writing in the second person. So she's putting us in the position of experiencing microaggressions on a daily basis. These like mini racism situations that happen again and again and again. It's a way to tell us what the difference is living in the self, your own identity versus what historical self, what the world around you tells you you're supposed to be. So to start figuring out what we're going to write about, I'd like you to begin by drawing a series of at least 5 nested circles with yourself and your innermost self at its center. Then I'd like you to fill out each circle with groups that you're a part of, or somehow or somehow identify you in some way. Okay, it could be your gender or your ethnicity. It could be your closest family and friends. It could be your wider friends or your school and job. It could be your community. Whether are you from a small town? Are you from a big city? Are you athletic? Or are you like, for example, let me give you an example. Like if I were making my circles, I'm a woman, so I would put that as one of my circles. I'm a mother, so I'd put that in another circle. I'm an athlete, and that's another circle. I come from a really small town. That's another circle. Those are things that I would be interested in writing about. And what I want you to do is to write about how these identity circles interact for you, or which ones you most identify with. Like go through and try to figure out which one is the most interesting to you. What is expected of you in the world, being that, like, for example, as a woman, I have a very athletic build, and as a woman, I feel like when I'm in society, all the images that I see are of really, really thin, and the ideal beauty is to be small and not muscular. And so growing up, I was always in a conflict of, I don't look like the girls in the ads or on TV. That's weird, right? And so it made me question what I looked like in my identity. So if I were, that would be an area that would be interesting to write about. So what I want you to do is, once you figure out which one of those circles, like I just figured out I would want to talk about my athletic self versus my, what I see in society. And I would like you to explore that in a 500-word lyric essay. You're going to write an essay where you address your reader in the second person. You wake up, you walk down the street, right? So address the reader as you. I want you to try to listen to all the things in regards to one of those topics and filter them through yourself. I want you to challenge the self and the historical self. Play with the space between those two things. What has society told you you should be versus who you really are? But I want you to focus on just one piece of that identity, the space in that one piece. Then I'd like you to dive into exploring through association what your definition of this is for yourself and what the cultural historical definition of this is. That's it for this week. Although what's not contained in this essay is I would like you to revise one of these two pieces for your formal assignment this week, just like we did week 1 and week 2. All right? Have fun. I look forward to reading your work. I will be putting comments back on your work by Tuesday, and I really have been enjoying what I'm reading. Keep up the good work, and I'll see you guys online.